Okay, item next. And just while we're getting Mr. Quam to the table here with his witnesses and so forth, one thing that we'll be looking at on the committee, and I'm sure you're all going to be looking at very closely with me, is we've got the Bill and Conference Committee. We're going to be hearing bills that members have, different things they need to be looking at. Sure. So the question is, how do we get some of those items, you know, what I'm going to be looking for is there an attachment to the current conference report? It looks to me on this one like one could argue there is. It's in the Senate bill, so it's been heard. So that kind of meets that qualification. But as I was asked by Leader Thiessen on the floor 2 days ago, we'll be following House rules very, very closely. But a lot of times we're going to have bills that people are really going to want. And the question is, how do we get them to the governor? And so I'm going to be looking very closely. Did the House or the Senate pass like language, similar language, exact language, whatever? This one I think shouldn't be a problem, but we're not going to want to necessarily have a second tax bill on the House floor. What could possibly go wrong with that? So it'd be my intention to follow the House rules very, very closely. I think this one I'll be taking input from all members of the committee. This one probably, if the committee later on decides to go with it, could probably be pulled into conference the way it looks to me. So I'm going to be kind of, every bill we talk about, has it been passed? Do we meet House rules that it was through one of the committees or one of the bodies and passed off through the floor in some omnibus bill? So I'll certainly be taking members' input on that whenever input is necessary. Chair Carlson.
So, Mr. Chairman, how are you going to handle a brand new issue under the rules then if you don't want to have any tax bills going through the floor?
Well, I think what's
because under both joint rules and House rules, you know, it has to be, as you just pointed out, something that's either same as or at least similar to qualify to be inserted in a conference committee report.
Thank you, Chair Carlson. What I'm looking at is if there are some issues that really need to be done, and if we can get agreement from leadership, from all caucuses, the minority in the House and Senate, the majority in the House and Senate, then I could see something moving forward. If we're going to have some bills where there's going to be 8,000 to 10,000 amendments offered, I'm not really interested in that. So I'm hoping that for a second tax bill to meet the House rules through all the proper committees off the House floor, there need to be some agreement, and so I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of real controversial type issues going that way, because obviously members are going to want to offer amendments there. So that's how I would see it going forward, and I'll be happy to talk to you further, and any member of the committee further, on how we might do that, because there's some important issues that have come to my desk that I'm struggling with every day to see how do we get this to conference and abide by House rules. So that's very important to me.
Yeah, Mr.
Chair Carlson.
One of the reasons I raised that question, on a personal basis, I have a bill that was introduced and sent to this committee the first day of session that's a brand new issue, not a, maybe a bit complex, but it's not a hugely controversial one. But I was also asking the question in a more general way, you know, because there would be other bills perhaps like that have not passed one body or the other. But it sounds to me like you're going to have some conversations too with the Senate on that.
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct. Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, as become their tradition, Congress passed some more tax changes in the end of the last year, and people are filling out their tax forms right now. And the House has traditionally been the leader on dealing with tax conformity issues. How do you see that fitting in the process that you've just defined?
That is a very, very good question, and we do have the department here. We do have a resource person from the department. Mr. Cummings, welcome back to the Tax Committee, by the way. And staff or whoever, if I don't say this just right, let me know, hit me or something. I work quite a bit with Commissioner Bowerly on this very issue because it's a very, very important issue. And I would say we've come to the conclusion that this is something that will probably be done in May if we can get there, if we can do whatever we're doing as far as conformity, whatever the committee agrees to, and we would move out of here. And when we start March 8th, and a lot of people already filed their taxes by March 8th, and Mr. Cummings, why don't you come to the table quick on this one? I don't want to say anything that's out of school here. But what we're looking at is, in my conversations with the department, is that if there is a bill passed in May that has conformity in it, then what they would be able to, I don't really think the department wants us to do a conformity bill right today, because a lot of people have filed their taxes, a lot of people have not filed their taxes. From what I understand it would be filing tax deadline would be done. And if we would do a conformity bill, then they can, I'm going to just say, flip a switch, and everybody at once would be treated with what the new conformity is. Now, it's not quite that easy, but Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as it relates to federal conformity, there were a number of federal tax provisions that have passed in the last year, some of which were very small and some of which were a little larger. I know there were a few tax provisions in the Bipartisan Budget Act, and then there was many more provisions passed in the PATH Act, which was passed in December. This was a federal conformity package that included many provisions, and some of which were extended for 2 years, some of which were extended for 5 years. There were some modifications that happened related to some of the depreciation provisions. So the federal update is a little different than it has been in the past. Usually, Mr. Chair, we want to make sure that any federal update provisions that happen before or as close to the beginning of the filing season as possible. And so with you, Mr. Chair, and I know previous chairs, we have surely appreciated the quick work that has happened in January to pass any federal conformity packages so that our taxpayers can be have the most limited effect as possible. But a similar circumstance in 2014, Mr. Chair, in which session started very late, and there was a federal conformity package that was attempted to be done early. It's still, just because of what it takes to pass the House and the Senate, it took a few weeks. And it got to the point where we really got up to, almost April, the end of March and April, before it was passed. Most taxpayers had already filed. And then we also had TurboTax and other sort of people that work as intermediaries to help people file their taxes. They have to change their software and update their software, and it got to the point where taxpayers maybe were a little more confused. The internet service providers, we were told by one person, not the internet service providers, that's a different bill, but the tax software that helps taxpayers, one person said that he retired because of the federal conformity package in 2014. So that was too late for a federal conformity package to pass. So what could happen this year, Mr. Chair, if it does pass in May, past the filing season, is that the vast majority of taxpayers that would be impacted by a federal conformity package, we would be able to automatically adjust their return in order to make sure that they took the benefits that they would have. We are making sure that in our questions we have a M1NC non-conforming, so we are asking the questions in order to ensure that in the cases where we can adjust their returns and make sure we're getting it back to them. In addition, Mr. Chair, there are some other provisions, some of the depreciation provisions where taxpayers will have to file an amended return, but we're trying to ensure that that's the minority. With all this said, I know that the House has yet to put together a budget. The governor is still going to release his budget, so I don't want to preempt any discussions that go on related to that.
And thank you very much, Mr. Cummings. And I would say that this is probably a hearing for another day very soon. And just so members know, I am meeting with the department today, and we have several meetings scheduled throughout the next few weeks. How's everything with the Atwater, Cosmos, Grove City Falcons?
Mr. Chair, they are doing fantastic, so thank you for...
Go Falcons.
Go Falcons.
Chair Drazkowski and then Dabney. Chair Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cummins, I was kind of confused. You had mentioned that there was going to be a budget discussion set. I thought that we have resolved the budget as of last year, and the budget is balanced and government is funded. Is that correct?
Mr. Cummings?
Mr. Chair, as of February 26th, I know that there was an announcement that there was a budget surplus of about $900 million, and I know that that will be a topic of discussion for the next few months. So I know that there's a supplemental budget that gets put together by both the House and the Senate as well as the governor. So I didn't want to preempt any discussion of a supplemental budget by anybody, including the governor, about federal conformity. So I just wanted to talk about the implications of what a federal conformity package may, if it was included in the House or the Senate or the governor's package, what the implications of that might be.
Chair Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cummins. Members, government's here asking for more of the people's money.
Chair Dabney.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Or Mr. Cummings.
a federal conformity package would be, that is tax benefits that would be going back to taxpayers, their depreciation provisions. They help make the tax code simpler. Mr. Chair, if there's a difference between the federal tax package and the federal tax code and the state tax code, it becomes much more complicated for taxpayers to file. And in addition, some of the provisions that were passed last December are benefits that taxpayers could receive. So the inclusion or exclusion of any sort of provisions in federal conformity, it has nothing to do with the Department of Revenue coming in. So I just wanted to make that clear, Mr. Chair.
Chair Drazkowski. Chair Dabney. Thank you. Then I think we'll go to the actual bill we have before us. And I don't want to be cutting anybody off here, but we will get to Representative Quam's bill. We'll have a few more questions, and then this discussion will continue. This is an ongoing thing. Chair Dabney and then Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, the conversation between Chair Drazkowski and Mr. Cummins here was a good segue, because it is about a sense of urgency around the tax conformity issues. I received an email this morning pointing out an issue that I'd not tracked, but the Feds apparently extended, I've got the language in front of me, but the Mortgage Forgiveness and Debt Relief Act for, I believe it's another year, meaning those who had to sell their homes in a short sale last year are protected from having to pay income taxes on the gap between what the mortgage was and what they finally resolved and sold the home for. So if we don't act on tax conformity, these folks could have several $1,000s in tax liability to the state of Minnesota that I would certainly argue they shouldn't. I've got to guess that Chair Drazkowski might agree with me on that. I'm not sure. But it would mean they'd be paying less, and these are folks who presumably are strapped to begin with financially, or they wouldn't have sold the house on a short sale. So asking these people to fill out their tax forms, pay this, readjust their gross income after doing the federal form for the state form, pay state income taxes on that, and then maybe later we'll come back and comply and you'll get a larger refund. You're asking folks who are short money to begin with to just pay us and hope. And I guess I've got a different sense of urgency than that. And I would encourage the committee to have the same.
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chair.
much. Thank you very much, Representative Dabney. Representative Chair Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to jump into the Republican politics here, but
I don't either.
I do hear that as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, which several of us are members of, and I have not talked directly to Chair Knobloch, but I do hear that you are considering a House budget resolution. In the second year of the biennium under the rules, that's optional, but you would pass a budget resolution if you were planning on having some appropriation-related bills. And I assume one that your caucus has talked openly about in terms of the need would be the bonding bill. Whatever you're going to put in there for debt service and so on. Would be one of the reasons that you'd have a budget resolution, but there apparently are conversations in some quarters about having a House budget resolution. And I do want to repeat, just so everybody understands, that first year of the biennium, we're required to have a budget resolution. Second year of the biennium, it's optional. And I can only recall, I think, one time where we didn't have a budget resolution the second year. But there's staff here that maybe recalls some of that better than I do, but it would appear that you're on the road of doing something.
Okay.
Being in the minority, I don't know what you're going to do, but you're going to do something, I understand.
Okay, with that, let's move forward. Mr. Cummings, didn't mean to put you on the spot today. Good job, thank you, and we'll see you this afternoon.
Happy to be a resource, Mr. Chair.
You're a great resource. Go Falcons.